She sat across from me at my antique oak dining table, her manicured fingers wrapped around a crystal wine glass, that sickeningly sweet smile spreading across her perfectly glossed lips as she complimented the hand-embroidered table runner I'd imported from France last spring. Delilah Hartwell had the audacity to look relaxed, even triumphant, as she sipped my vintage Bordeaux and pretended to admire the floral centerpiece I'd spent 3 hours perfecting that morning. What this calculating woman sitting in my Rosehaven estate dining room didn't know was that in exactly 27 minutes, her devoted husband Dr. Nathan Hartwell would walk through my front door carrying a bouquet of white orchids and a bottle of champagne, believing he was arriving for a surprise anniversary celebration I'd supposedly organized in their honor. And when that mahogany door opened and Nathan saw his beloved wife of 8 years sitting intimately close to my husband Trevor at our dinner table, that confident, predatory smile would crumble into the kind of pure terror I'd been fantasizing about for the past 6 months. Before we dive back in, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if this story resonates with you, don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is something truly special I can't wait to share. My name is Evangeline Cross, and what I'm about to share with you isn't just another story about catching a cheating spouse or exposing a manipulative mistress, though there's plenty of both. This is the story of how one perfectly orchestrated dinner party became the night when the most toxic woman in our social circle learned that some games are infinitely more dangerous than the players realize. This is about the evening when Delilah Hartwell, who thought she was untouchable because of her beauty, her connections, and her ability to manipulate every man she met, discovered that she'd been playing chess with someone who was already 10 moves ahead. If you like the story of our channel, please like the channel, and if you are interested in these stories, join our channel membership. Thank you, but this story isn't really about revenge, even though that's exactly what it became. It's about the moment when everything I believed about trust, loyalty, and the people I'd welcomed into my home turned out to be an elaborate performance that had been running for months. It's about discovering that the woman I'd considered a close friend, someone I'd confided in about my marriage struggles and my dreams of starting a family, had been systematically destroying everything I held dear while smiling to my face and accepting my hospitality. I'm a senior marketing director at Pinnacle Creative Solutions here in Willowbrook County, which means I spend my days understanding human psychology, predicting behavior patterns, and crafting campaigns that influence how people think and act. I have an almost supernatural ability to read people, to see through facades and identify what motivates someone's actions. It's what makes me exceptional at my job, and it's what should have made me realize that Delilah's sudden interest in our friendship wasn't as innocent as it appeared. For the past 3 years, I believed I was living exactly the life I'd worked so hard to create. My husband Trevor Cross is a successful real estate developer who specializes in luxury commercial properties throughout the region. We'd been married for 9 years, together for 12, and from every external perspective, we were the power couple that everyone in Willowbrook County aspired to become. I was the sharp, successful career woman who could close million-dollar advertising deals during the day and then host dinner parties that left our guests talking for months. Trevor was the charming, ambitious businessman whose developments were transforming our community and whose warm personality made him the kind of man that other men respected and women found irresistibly attractive. Our home at 1247 Maple Ridge Drive was a stunning Victorian mansion that we'd restored to museum-quality perfection, complete with period-appropriate furnishings, manicured gardens, and a wine cellar that hosted tastings for the region's most influential families. It was the kind of house where important business deals were discussed over dinner, where Trevor could entertain potential investors, and where I could host the creative directors and agency partners who shaped our region's commercial landscape. We had everything that successful couples in their early 30s were supposed to want: thriving careers, financial security, a beautiful home, and a marriage that seemed to embody partnership at its finest. We traveled to marketing conferences in Milan and real estate summits in Dubai. We spent our weekends antiquing in the historic districts of neighboring towns or attending charity galas that supported causes we genuinely cared about. We were the couple that other couples looked at and wondered what their secret was. Our social circle envied us, our families held us up as proof that two ambitious people could build something extraordinary together, and our professional networks considered us the gold standard of what modern marriage could achieve when both partners were committed to success. Through all the usual challenges that ambitious couples face, competing schedules, the pressure of demanding careers, the gradual realization that children might be more complicated than we'd originally planned, we seemed to emerge stronger. More connected, more committed to the life we built together. What I didn't understand until 6 months ago was that while I was perfecting our life, Trevor had been constructing an entirely separate one. And Delilah Hartwell, the woman who would soon be sitting at my dinner table with such dangerous confidence, was the architect of that alternate reality. Tonight, as she sits across from me wearing a black silk dress that probably costs more than most people's monthly salary, laughing at Trevor's stories and playing the role of the devoted family friend, she has no idea that I know exactly who she really is. She doesn't know that I've spent the last 4 months methodically documenting every lie, every secret meeting, every stolen moment that she and my husband thought they'd hidden so cleverly. She doesn't know that this dinner party she thinks is a routine social gathering is actually the most carefully orchestrated exposure of adultery that Willowbrook County has ever witnessed, and she certainly doesn't know that her devoted husband, Nathan, is currently parking his silver BMW in my circular driveway, believing he's arriving for a surprise celebration that I supposedly organized to honor their 8th wedding anniversary. In 27 minutes, maybe 26 now, Nathan Hartwell is going to walk through that front door carrying flowers and champagne, expecting to surprise the woman he spent 8 years adoring. Instead, he's going to discover that his beloved wife has been systematically destroying my marriage while simultaneously lying to him about everything from her work schedule to her weekend shopping trips with the girls. This is the story of how one dinner party, 6 carefully selected guests, and months of meticulous planning became the night that justice was served with the main course, and how 2 unfaithful spouses learned that some deceptions are more dangerous than they ever imagined. It took a lot of care and time to prepare and narrate this for you, so if you're enjoying it, a quick subscribe really helps and means the world to us. Alright, let's get back to it. My expertise in reading people and understanding behavioral psychology isn't just some casual hobby or natural intuition, it's a skill I've spent 15 years developing into a razor-sharp weapon that's made me one of the most successful marketing directors on the East Coast. At Pinnacle Creative Solutions, I specialize in consumer behavior analysis and psychological profiling for Fortune 500 companies who need to understand exactly what makes their target audiences tick. I can analyze a focus group for 30 minutes and tell you not just what people want to buy, but why they want to buy it, what emotional triggers will make them act, and what subtle psychological cues will make them trust a brand completely. I've built million-dollar campaigns by understanding the psychology of deception, how people convince themselves they need things they don't actually want, how they rationalize purchases that go against their stated values, how they can be influenced to change their behavior through carefully crafted messaging that speaks to their deepest insecurities and desires. My specialty is seeing through the masks people wear, identifying the gap between what someone says they want and what their actions actually reveal about their true motivations. Companies pay me 6-figure consulting fees because I can watch someone's micro-expressions during a presentation and tell you whether they're genuinely interested or just being polite. I can analyze social media behavior patterns and predict with 90% accuracy whether someone is likely to make a major life change in the next 6 months. I've helped divorce attorneys identify hidden assets by analyzing spending patterns, and I've assisted federal investigators in understanding the psychological profiles of white-collar criminals who thought they were too sophisticated to get caught. The irony that makes this story so devastatingly perfect is that the same woman who could spot deception and manipulation in complete strangers was completely blind to the elaborate performance being conducted in her own home by the two people she trusted most. The expert in human psychology who could identify lies and hidden agendas in boardrooms filled with corporate executives somehow missed the fact that her husband and her closest female friend were conducting the most sophisticated deception campaign of their lives right under her nose. But here's what Trevor and Delilah didn't understand about my analytical nature. Once I finally started asking the right questions, once my professional instincts finally overcame my personal blind spots, I would bring the same methodical thoroughness to investigating their betrayal that I brought to my most complex corporate campaigns. The same attention to detail that had made me legendary at predicting human behavior would make me absolutely devastating at exposing IT.AT Pinnacle Creative Solutions. I'm known as the director who never loses a pitch because I understand people better than they understand themselves. I can walk into a room full of skeptical executives and leave with signed contracts because I know exactly which psychological buttons to push, which emotional appeals will resonate, and which logical arguments will overcome their resistance. My colleagues call me the mind reader because I can predict client reactions with uncanny accuracy. My personal life had always been the one area where I deliberately turned off my analytical instincts. I'd convinced myself that applying professional skepticism to my marriage would be a betrayal of trust, that love meant giving Trevor the benefit of the doubt rather than analyzing his behavior for inconsistencies. I told myself that a healthy relationship required faith, not investigation. This fundamental disconnect between my professional and personal judgment would prove to be the most expensive mistake of my life. While I was helping corporations expose employee fraud and identify dishonest business partners, my own husband was conducting a campaign of deception that would have impressed the most sophisticated con artists I'd ever analyzed. The stakes in this story aren't just about catching a cheating spouse or exposing a manipulative friend. This is about someone whose entire career was built on understanding human nature, discovering that she'd been played by amateurs who thought they could outsmart a professional. This is about a woman who specialized in creating consequences for people who underestimated her abilities, finally turning those same skills on the most important targets of her life. Trevor had made one critical error in his risk assessment. He'd forgotten that his wife was someone who'd built her career on ensuring that people who thought they were too clever to get caught learned exactly how wrong they were. And Delilah, who'd spent months thinking she was manipulating some naive suburban housewife, had no idea she was actually targeting someone whose job involved destroying people who believed their deceptions were too sophisticated to unravel. The woman who could predict consumer behavior was about to orchestrate the most perfectly timed revelation of adultery in Willowbrook County history. And tonight, as Delilah sits at my dining table with that confident smile, she's about to discover that some games are infinitely more dangerous when you're playing against someone who wrote the playbook on psychological manipulation. Until 8 months ago, I genuinely believed I was living the exact life I'd dreamed about since graduating summa cum laude from Northwestern University with my master's degree in consumer psychology. Trevor and I had created what everyone in Willowbrook County considered the perfect example of what two ambitious, intelligent people could accomplish when they chose to build something extraordinary together rather than competing against each other. Our love story began 7 years ago at a business networking event in downtown Crescent City, where I was presenting research on luxury consumer behavior patterns to a room full of real estate developers and investment professionals. Trevor was in the audience, not because he needed to understand consumer psychology, but because he was genuinely fascinated by the science behind why people make major purchasing decisions. After my presentation, he approached me with questions that weren't about impressing me or asking for my number, but because he wanted to understand how psychological insights could help him create residential developments that would genuinely improve people's lives rather than just maximize profit margins. Most men were either intimidated by my academic credentials and professional success, or they assumed my work was some kind of glorified marketing fluff that anyone could do. Trevor was different. He understood immediately that consumer psychology was essentially detective work, that I was solving complex puzzles about human motivation and behavior. He asked intelligent questions about my research methodologies, wanted to know how I'd identified the connection between childhood experiences and adult spending patterns, and seemed genuinely impressed by the federal consulting work I'd done on cases involving sophisticated fraud schemes. By the end of that evening, we'd moved our conversation to a quiet corner booth where Trevor was sketching architectural plans on cocktail napkins while I explained how environmental psychology influenced buying decisions. He told me about his vision for creating luxury developments that felt like communities rather than just collections of expensive houses, while I shared my theories about how people's living spaces shaped their sense of identity and belonging. Our courtship was perfectly designed for two people who thrived on intellectual connection and professional ambition. Trevor would call me between construction site visits to hear about the latest consumer behavior study I was analyzing. I'd drive out to his development projects on weekends to see how he was implementing design elements that reflected the psychological principles we discussed. We'd spend entire evenings debating the ethics of influence and persuasion, whether in marketing campaigns or architectural design, both of us fascinated by the ways people could be guided toward better decisions without feeling manipulated. 3 years later, Trevor proposed during a weekend trip to the Hamptons, not with a traditional romantic dinner but during a morning walk on the beach where he told me that I was the only person who'd ever understood both his ambition and his genuine desire to create something meaningful. The engagement ring was a flawless 3-carat emerald-cut diamond that he'd chosen because, in his words, it reminded him of my analytical mind, brilliant, multifaceted, and impossible to fake. Our wedding at the historic Willowbrook Manor was featured in Regional Lifestyle magazine as one of the year's most elegant celebrations. 200 guests including city council members, prominent business leaders, and senior executives from major advertising agencies throughout the region. Trevor's business partners served as groomsmen while my sorority sisters from Northwestern flew in from across the country to be my bridesmaids. We honeymooned in Switzerland, where Trevor attended an international conference on sustainable development practices while I toured the research facilities at the University of Zurich that had produced groundbreaking studies on consumer decision-making processes. The house on Maple Ridge Drive came 2 years after our wedding, when both our careers had reached points where we could afford something truly spectacular. Trevor had just secured the contract for Willowbrook County's largest mixed-use development project, a $50 million undertaking that would establish him as one of the region's premier commercial developers. I'd been promoted to senior director at Pinnacle Creative Solutions after successfully launching a campaign that increased client revenues by 40% across the board. The Victorian mansion was an 1890s architectural masterpiece that had been meticulously maintained by 3 generations of the same family before they decided to relocate to Florida. The house featured original hardwood floors, hand-carved crown molding, and a master suite that Trevor converted into a combination home office and design studio where he could review architectural plans and conduct video conferences with investors. I claimed the sun-drenched library as my workspace, surrounding myself with psychology journals, consumer research databases, and multiple monitors where I could analyze behavioral data and create presentation materials for client meetings. We entertained extensively and with sophisticated flair. Monthly dinner parties for Trevor's business associates and their spouses, quarterly wine tastings for my agency colleagues and our most important clients, annual holiday celebrations that drew guests from both our professional and personal circles. I became known throughout our social network for my attention to detail and my ability to create environments where important people felt comfortable discussing important business. Every place setting was perfect, every wine pairing was thoughtfully selected, every conversation topic was strategically chosen to facilitate the kind of meaningful connections that led to lasting professional relationships. Trevor was the ideal host, charming and engaging with everyone from city planning commissioners to the young architects he mentored at his firm. He had an extraordinary gift for making people feel valued and heard, remembering personal details about their families, their hobbies, their professional challenges, and celebrating their achievements. Guests would often comment that they'd never felt more welcomed anywhere than at our dinner table, and that they left our parties feeling genuinely enriched by the conversations they'd had. Our marriage represented everything that successful professional couples in their 30s aspired to achieve. We supported each other's demanding careers without resentment or competition. We maintained our individual identities and interests while building something stronger together. We communicated effectively about everything from financial planning to career decisions to our shared disappointment when we realized that starting a family would be more complicated than we'd originally anticipated due to some health challenges I'd been dealing with. We traveled internationally for business conferences and pleasure, investing wisely in art, real estate, and retirement accounts that reflected our shared commitment to long-term financial security. We maintained close friendships with other successful couples who shared our values and interests, contributing generously to charitable causes and serving on nonprofit boards that addressed issues we genuinely cared about. From every external measure, Evangeline and Trevor Cross were living the American dream at its most refined and sophisticated level. We had achieved financial security that allowed us to pursue our passions, professional recognition that validated our expertise, social standing that opened doors throughout the region, and a marriage that others consistently held up as proof of what true partnership could accomplish. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have imagined despite my professional expertise in uncovering hidden motivations and deceptive behaviors, was that Trevor had been systematically constructing a parallel life that made the most sophisticated corporate fraud schemes I'd ever analyzed look simple by comparison. And Delilah Hartwell, the woman who would soon be sitting across from me with such dangerous confidence, was the co-conspirator in the most elaborate betrayal I'd ever encountered. The irony was almost poetic in its cruelty. My entire career was built on my ability to see through carefully constructed facades, to identify the gap between what people claimed to want and what their actions actually revealed about their true motivations. I could analyze a corporation's internal communications and identify which executives were planning to jump ship to competitors. I could review a company's marketing materials and predict with startling accuracy which campaigns would fail because they were based on fundamental misunderstandings of consumer psychology. But when it came to my own home, my own marriage, my own closest relationships, I'd somehow created elaborate blind spots that allowed the two people I trusted most to conduct a campaign of deception that would have impressed the most sophisticated con artists I'd ever studied. Professionally, the changes began so subtly that I convinced myself they were natural evolution in a mature marriage that had settled into comfortable rhythms after 9 years together. Looking back now, I realize I was witnessing the careful implementation of a deception strategy that would have impressed the most sophisticated corporate manipulators I'd encountered in my professional career. But at the time, every warning sign seemed to have a perfectly reasonable explanation that my trusting heart accepted without the kind of rigorous analysis I would have applied to any business relationship. Trevor's work schedule started becoming unpredictable in ways that initially seemed like professional growth rather than personal deception. For the first 8 years of our marriage, his project meetings and site visits had followed relatively consistent patterns. Mondays were typically reserved for architectural consultations and permit applications, Tuesdays and Wednesdays for active construction oversight, Thursdays for investor meetings and financial reviews, and Fridays for planning sessions with his design team. Weekend work was genuinely rare unless he was dealing with weather-related construction delays or last-minute investor emergencies, but around 10 months ago, Trevor began mentioning unexpected client demands with increasing frequency. Emergency site visits that required his immediate attention on Saturday mornings, last-minute investor dinners that couldn't be rescheduled, urgent design consultations that somehow required his presence at unusual hours when other architects would typically handle routine coverage. He started staying at the office until 9 or 10 at night, claiming that a particularly demanding client was pushing aggressive deadlines that required his personal oversight of every detail. What made these explanations so believable was Trevor's genuine passion for his work and his well-established reputation for perfectionism. He'd always been the kind of developer who insisted on personally reviewing every aspect of his projects, from foundation specifications to interior design details. His clients appreciated his hands-on approach and were willing to pay premium fees for his direct involvement in their developments. So when he began working longer hours and weekend schedules, it seemed like natural progression for someone whose business was expanding into increasingly prestigious and complex projects. The travel increased around the same time, but again in ways that seemed entirely logical for someone in Trevor's position. He'd always attended industry conferences and investor meetings, but suddenly there were specialized seminars in cities I'd never heard him mention before. Weekend workshops in Burlington focusing on sustainable development practices, 3-day intensive courses in Providence covering new environmental regulations, educational symposiums in Albany that required his presence Friday afternoon through Sunday evening. When I suggested joining him for a few of these trips, turning them into romantic getaways like we'd done throughout our marriage, Trevor always had perfectly reasonable explanations for why that wouldn't work. The conferences were too intensive and technical, requiring his complete focus without social distractions. The venues were in remote locations that didn't offer the kind of amenities that would make the trips enjoyable for me. The schedules were too demanding, with early morning sessions and late evening networking events that would leave no time for us to actually spend together. I found myself eating dinner alone 3 or 4 nights a week, something that had never happened in our entire relationship. Trevor would text around 7 o'clock with apologies for another unexpected delay, suggesting I go ahead without him since he'd grabbed something quick from the sandwich shop near his office. He'd arrive home after 10, claiming exhaustion from complex negotiations or detailed technical discussions, too mentally drained to talk about his day in any meaningful detail. Our weekend routines, which had been sacred throughout our marriage, began disintegrating in ways that felt gradual rather than sudden. Saturday morning antiquing trips became impossible because Trevor needed to review architectural plans or catch up on project documentation that had been delayed by busy weekday schedules. Sunday brunches with friends were repeatedly canceled because urgent client calls couldn't wait until Monday morning. Our traditional Sunday evening meal preparation, where we'd cook elaborate dinners together while discussing our upcoming week, became solo affairs as Trevor fielded important phone calls or reviewed complex contracts that somehow couldn't wait until business hours. The physical changes were subtle but unmistakable to someone who'd been married to the same man for 9 years. Trevor began showering immediately upon arriving home, claiming that construction environments made him feel dirty and uncomfortable, and he needed to wash away the dust and chemical smells before he could truly relax. This was new behavior. For years, he'd typically changed clothes and unwound with a glass of wine before eventually showering later in the evening. His grooming habits shifted in ways that seemed individually insignificant but created a noticeable Pattern when viewed collectively. Trevor started getting haircuts every 3 weeks instead of his usual monthly schedule, often booking appointments during weekday lunch breaks rather than his convenient Saturday morning routine. He purchased several expensive new suits, claiming his existing wardrobe looked outdated when meeting with high-profile investors and their representatives. He bought premium ties, upgraded his watch to something more sophisticated, and started carrying a different briefcase, leather instead of the practical canvas messenger bag he'd used throughout our marriage. The technology changes should have triggered every professional alarm I possessed, given my expertise in analyzing behavioral patterns and identifying deceptive practices. Trevor became protective of his phone in ways that violated our usual patterns of casual digital sharing. For 9 years, we'd used each other's devices interchangeably, checking messages when the other was driving, answering calls when someone was in the shower, sharing photos and calendar updates without thinking twice about privacy boundaries. Suddenly, Trevor's phone was always face down during dinner conversations. He'd take it with him to the bathroom, something he'd never done previously. When it buzzed during our conversations, he'd glance at it with an expression I couldn't quite interpret, not the mild annoyance of someone being interrupted by work, but something closer to anticipation mixed with anxiety. He started charging his phone in his home office rather than on his nightstand, claiming the bedroom charging cable was getting worn and unreliable. His computer habits transformed as well. Trevor had always been casual about leaving his laptop open around the house, often asking me to check his email or calendar when he was busy with other tasks. But he began closing it whenever he left the room, password-protecting files that had never been secured before, and spending unusual amounts of time on what he claimed were research projects that required intensive focus and couldn't be interrupted. The financial irregularities were perhaps the most obvious warning signs. Given my professional background in analyzing spending patterns and identifying suspicious transaction behaviors, our credit card statements began showing charges that didn't align with Trevor's explained activities. Expensive restaurants in downtown Crescent City where he claimed to be meeting with potential investors, but always on evenings when he told me he was working late at the office. Gas purchases in towns where he supposedly attended weekend conferences, but the timing and locations didn't match the educational events he described. Hotel charges appeared that seemed excessive for the modest accommodations Trevor typically chose for business travel. When I asked about these expenses during our monthly financial review, a practice we'd maintained throughout our marriage to ensure we were meeting our savings goals and staying aligned on major purchases, Trevor provided explanations that were detailed enough to sound credible but vague enough to avoid easy verification. Most devastating of all were the emotional changes that I couldn't quantify or analyze with the same precision I brought to behavioral assessment and professional contexts. Trevor became distant in ways that were almost imperceptible, still affectionate, still attentive, still the charming man I'd married, but somehow performing these behaviors rather than feeling them naturally. Our conversations became more superficial, focused on logistics and schedules rather than the deeper intellectual and emotional connection that had always defined our relationship. The man who had once been genuinely fascinated by my consumer psychology research began offering distracted responses when I shared details about my latest projects. The husband who had previously remembered every detail about my complex client campaigns started forgetting basic facts about cases I'd mentioned multiple times. The partner who had once engaged in lengthy discussions about human motivation and behavioral patterns began changing the subject whenever I brought up professional insights about deception, manipulation, or the psychology of betrayal. I told myself these changes reflected natural maturation in a long-term marriage, the kind of comfortable settling that happens when two people become completely secure in their relationship. I convinced myself that Trevor's increased focus on his career was admirable ambition, that his need for personal space reflected healthy independence, that his distraction during our conversations simply meant he was processing important professional challenges. The woman who could identify fraudulent corporate communications with a single glance somehow couldn't recognize that her husband's daily stories about his activities had become elaborate fiction more creative than most novels. But deep in my analytical mind, the same instincts that had made me exceptional at detecting corporate deception were registering patterns that didn't align with the explanations I was choosing to accept. The moment that shattered my willful ignorance came on a Thursday evening in late September during what should have been a routine task that I'd performed countless times throughout our marriage. I was in our master bedroom preparing Trevor's luggage for his upcoming weekend conference in Hartford, or what I believed was a conference in Hartford, when I discovered something that made every rational explanation I'd been constructing collapse. Like a house of cards built on quicksand, Trevor was downstairs in his home office, supposedly reviewing architectural plans for Monday morning's investor presentation, while I methodically went through his garments to ensure he had everything needed for what he described as a challenging 3-day symposium on sustainable commercial development. I'd been handling this kind of travel preparation for 9 years, taking genuine pride in my attention to detail and my ability to anticipate his needs before he even realized what he might have forgotten to pack. As I reached into the inner pocket of his charcoal gray blazer, the one he'd worn to dinner with the City Planning Commission 2 weeks earlier, my fingers encountered something that didn't belong among the usual collection of business cards, conference programs, and professional debris that accumulated in his pockets. It was a small, expensive piece of cardstock that made my blood turn to ice water and my hands begin trembling uncontrollably. The item was a spa day gift certificate from Serenity Springs Resort and Wellness Center, an exclusive luxury retreat about 2 hours north of Willowbrook County. This wasn't the kind of place that catered to business conferences or professional development seminars. Serenity Springs specialized in romantic couples retreats, offering packages that included private massage therapy sessions, intimate candlelit dinners, and weekend experiences designed specifically for wealthy couples seeking to reconnect and rekindle their relationships. But it wasn't the location that made my stomach clench with recognition and dawning horror. It was the date printed on the certificate, 3 weeks earlier, on a weekend when Trevor had supposedly been attending a construction management workshop in Springfield. According to my meticulous records, he'd called me that Saturday evening to complain about the outdated presentation materials and uncomfortable hotel accommodations, describing educational sessions that were apparently so disappointing he'd considered cutting the trip short and driving home early. Inside the certificate envelope, folded with the kind of careful precision that suggested it had been treasured rather than carelessly stuffed into a pocket, was a handwritten note on expensive cream-colored stationery. The paper had a subtle watermark and felt like the kind of luxury writing material that cost more per sheet than most people spent on entire boxes of greeting cards. The handwriting was distinctly feminine, flowing and elegant in a way that spoke of private school education and deliberate attention to aesthetic presentation, but it was the words themselves that made my entire world tilt sideways and my analytical mind struggle to process their devastating implications. My darling Trevor, the note began, last weekend was absolutely perfect. I keep thinking about our couple's massage and the way you looked at me during our private dinner on the terrace. I can't wait until we can finally stop pretending and build the life we've been planning together. All my love, always and forever, Delilah. I read those words 5 times before my professional training could overcome the emotional shock sufficiently to analyze their meaning. This wasn't evidence of a casual flirtation or a momentary lapse in judgment. This was documentation of an ongoing relationship that included romantic getaways, future planning, and the kind of emotional intimacy that should have belonged exclusively to our marriage. Someone named Delilah was apparently so confident in her position in Trevor's life that she was already envisioning a future where they didn't need to hide their relationship. The name hit me like a physical blow to the chest. Delilah Hartwell had been part of our social circle for almost 2 years, ever since she and her husband Nathan had moved to Willowbrook County when he accepted a position as chief of cardiology at Crescent City Medical Center. She was beautiful in the way that successful, well-maintained women in their early 30s could be when they had unlimited resources for personal care, perfectly styled auburn hair, flawless skin, and the kind of confident presence that commanded attention in any room she entered. More devastatingly, Delilah had positioned herself as one of my closest female friends. She was someone I'd confided in about my marriage challenges, someone who'd offered sympathy and support when Trevor and I were struggling with fertility issues, someone who'd listened with apparent compassion when I shared my concerns about whether we were growing apart as we focused more intensively on our respective careers. The woman who'd been systematically destroying my marriage was the same person who'd been offering me shoulder to cry on and advice about how to reconnect with my husband. My forensic training kicked in automatically, the same methodical approach I'd used to analyze thousands of cases involving corporate deception and financial fraud. I photographed the note and gift certificate with my phone, documenting the evidence before carefully replacing everything exactly as I'd found it. Trevor couldn't know that I'd discovered his secret, not until I'd had time to determine the full scope of his deception and plan my response accordingly. But even as my professional instincts took control, the emotional impact was overwhelming in ways I wasn't prepared to handle. This wasn't just infidelity, it was systematic betrayal that had been carefully constructed over months, possibly years. Trevor hadn't made a mistake or succumbed to a moment of weakness. He'd built an entire parallel relationship with someone who clearly believed she had a legitimate claim to his future. The woman who'd written that note wasn't some random affair partner who understood her place as a temporary distraction. She was someone who'd been promised enough to believe that my marriage was an obstacle to be overcome rather than a permanent boundary to respect. Delilah had been planning a future with my husband while simultaneously pretending to be my friend and confidant. I spent the next hour sitting on our bedroom floor, surrounded by Trevor's clothes and conference materials, trying to reconcile the evidence in my hands with everything I'd believed about my husband and our marriage. The man who'd been lying to me about weekend conferences was the same person who'd held me through miscarriages, who'd celebrated every professional achievement in my career, who'd spent 9 years building what I'd believed was an unshakable partnership. The betrayal was so complete, so thoroughly planned, that it forced me to question every interaction we had over the past year. How many of his supposed emergency meetings had actually been romantic dinners with Delilah? How many weekend conferences had been intimate getaways to luxury resorts? How many late nights at the office had been spent in someone else's bed, planning a future that didn't include me? But alongside the devastation came something unexpected, a cold analytical fury that felt familiar from my most challenging professional cases. The same part of my mind that had helped me expose elaborate corporate fraud schemes was already beginning to formulate questions that needed answers. Who exactly was Delilah Hartwell beyond the carefully curated persona she'd presented to our social circle? How long had this relationship been developing? What promises had Trevor made to justify his deception? What lies had he told about our marriage to rationalize his betrayal? As I carefully restored our bedroom to its previous state, returning Trevor's clothes to their hangers and his conference materials to their organized stacks, I made a decision that would change the trajectory of everything that followed. I wasn't going to confront Trevor immediately with emotional accusations that might give him the opportunity to control the narrative or minimize his deception. Instead, I was going to investigate this betrayal with the same systematic thoroughness I brought to my most complex professional cases. The woman who'd built her career on exposing people who thought they were too clever to get caught was about to turn those same skills on the most important case of her life. Trevor and Delilah had made a critical error in underestimating my professional capabilities. They'd forgotten that his wife specialized in methodically destroying people who believed their deception was too sophisticated to unravel. The investigation was about to begin, and this time the stakes weren't just corporate reputation or financial recovery. This time I was fighting for the truth about my own life, and I intended to win with devastating completeness. Delilah Hartwell, whoever she really was beyond her carefully constructed facade, had no idea that her tender love note had just triggered the most thorough investigation of deception that either she or Trevor would ever experience. The transformation from devastated wife to methodical investigator happened with the same precision I brought to my most complex corporate fraud cases. That Thursday night, after carefully documenting Delilah's love note and returning everything to its original position, I sat in my home office until 4 a.m. creating the framework for what would become the most thorough investigation of my career. The same analytical skills that had made me legendary at Pinnacle Creative Solutions for exposing corporate deception would now be turned on my own personal life with devastating effectiveness. My first priority was establishing a completely secure digital environment where I could conduct research without leaving any traces on our shared household devices or networks. Friday morning, I drove to an electronics store 3 towns over and purchased a laptop with cash, setting up entirely separate email accounts and cloud storage systems that Trevor would never discover. I used the same digital security protocols I developed for protecting sensitive client information, creating multiple layers of encryption and anonymous browsing capabilities that would shield my investigation from anyone who might be monitoring our home internet activity. Delilah's full background became my initial focus. With only her first name, her connection to our social circle, and the evidence of expensive tastes suggested by her luxury stationery and choice of exclusive resorts, I began the kind of systematic research that had made me invaluable to federal investigators working complex fraud cases. If she was involved with Trevor, she likely moved in similar professional or social networks, which meant I could trace her through the interconnected web of Willowbrook County's affluent community. I started with the Serenity Springs resorts, guest services and booking systems, using professional databases and investigative techniques I'd learned during my federal consulting work. The resort's clientele was exclusively wealthy professionals, and their discretion policies meant that guest information wasn't publicly available. However, their social media presence and marketing materials provided valuable intelligence about the type of couples who frequented their facilities. Cross-referencing membership lists from exclusive organizations where Trevor and I had connections, I began building a profile of women named Delilah who moved in circles where they might encounter a successful real estate developer. The Willowbrook Country Club membership roster, the Crescent City Symphony Orchestra patron list, and the exclusive Riverside Tennis Club all became sources of potential leads. The breakthrough came when I discovered Delilah's professional LinkedIn profile and cross-referenced it with corporate records from the county courthouse. Delilah Hartwell was listed as a senior marketing consultant at Prestige Brand Management, a boutique firm that specialized in luxury real estate marketing for high-end developments. Her professional background included extensive experience in creating marketing campaigns for exclusive residential communities, exactly the kind of expertise that Trevor's expanding business would require for his most prestigious projects. The professional connection explained everything while making the betrayal infinitely more devastating. Delilah wasn't some random woman Trevor had met at a social event. She was a business consultant whose work directly complemented his own, someone he would have encountered regularly through legitimate professional collaborations. Their relationship had the perfect cover of necessary business meetings while providing endless opportunities for private encounters disguised as marketing consultations and project planning sessions. Over the following weeks, I used every investigative technique I'd mastered during 15 years of fraud detection to build a comprehensive understanding of Trevor and Delilah's relationship. I hired Cassandra Mitchell, a private investigator with extensive law enforcement background and specialized experience in high-net-worth adultery cases. Cassandra's discretion and professional expertise made her perfect for gathering the kind of evidence that would be undeniable under any scrutiny. The surveillance results revealed that Trevor and Delilah had become careless in their confidence, meeting regularly at expensive restaurants throughout the region and taking weekend trips to luxury destinations without bothering to maintain their previous operational security. Their behavior suggested they believed their deception was so sophisticated that they no longer needed to worry about detection. Financial analysis of Trevor's business accounts revealed a pattern of consulting fees paid to prestige brand management that far exceeded typical marketing budgets for residential developments of his scale. Cross-referencing these payments with Delilah's social media activities showed luxury purchases and vacation photos that corresponded perfectly with Trevor's business expense reports. He'd been essentially funding their relationship through inflated consulting contracts, using our joint business assets to pay for romantic getaways and expensive gifts. The scope of their financial deception was staggering. Trevor had been redirecting money from our shared investment accounts into a separate business account that funded Delilah's consulting fees, which she then used to pay for their shared expenses. Hotel receipts, restaurant bills, jewelry purchases, and spa treatments were all being funded through a complex money laundering scheme that would have impressed the corporate criminals I'd helped federal prosecutors convict. Most damaging of all was the evidence I uncovered about their future planning. Delilah had been quietly transitioning her business relationships and reducing her local client commitments, preparing for what appeared to be a significant relocation. Trevor had been researching real estate opportunities in coastal Carolina, ostensibly for investment purposes but with a focus on areas where Delilah had family connections and previous business relationships that they'd been planning to abandon Willowbrook County entirely, leaving behind both their current marriages and professional obligations for a completely fresh start together. The weekend at Serenity Springs hadn't been a guilty pleasure or temporary escape. It had been a trial run for their shared future, testing how well they could function as a legitimate couple rather than secret lovers. The evidence also revealed the sophisticated psychology behind their deception strategy. Delilah had deliberately cultivated her friendship with me as both emotional cover and intelligence gathering. Her sympathetic conversations about my marriage troubles weren't genuine support, they were reconnaissance missions designed to understand my vulnerabilities and identify the best ways to exploit them. She'd been reporting back to Trevor about my concerns, my insecurities, and my professional demands, helping him craft responses and behaviors that would keep me satisfied, while giving them maximum freedom to develop their relationship. Every piece of marital advice she'd offered, every sympathetic response to my fertility struggles, every encouraging word about working through relationship challenges had been calculated manipulation designed to keep me trusting and unaware. Trevor's behavior modifications over the past year hadn't been random changes or natural evolution, they'd been carefully planned adjustments based on Delilah's psychological insights about how to manage my suspicions. His increased attention to grooming and professional appearance wasn't about impressing clients, it was about looking good for his mistress. His travel schedule wasn't driven by business demands, it was coordinated with Delilah's availability and their shared calendar of romantic getaways. By the time I finished gathering evidence, I had enough documentation to destroy both their personal and professional reputations completely. Banking records, surveillance photos, communication logs, travel receipts, and witness statements created an irrefutable case that demonstrated months of systematic deception involving both adultery and financial fraud, but simply exposing their affair wouldn't provide sufficient justice for the elaborate psychological manipulation they'd constructed. They'd both invested significant time and energy in building their secret relationship while systematically lying to everyone who trusted them. They'd used their professional expertise to create sophisticated cover stories and financial deceptions that went far beyond simple adultery into criminal territory. What they deserved wasn't just exposure, they deserved the kind of precisely orchestrated humiliation that would ensure their betrayal became a permanent part of their professional and social legacy. The dinner party that would ultimately destroy them both was beginning to take shape in my mind, and it would be more masterful than any fraud investigation I'd ever conducted. The woman who'd specialized in exposing people who thought they were too clever to get caught was about to orchestrate the most perfect revelation of deception in Willowbrook County history. Trevor and Delilah had no idea that their carefully planned future together was about to become the most public destruction of two careers and two marriages that our community had ever witnessed. The plan that crystallized in my mind over the following weeks was more intricate than any corporate fraud investigation I'd ever conducted, requiring the same methodical attention to detail but with the added complexity of human psychology and social dynamics. I wasn't just gathering evidence anymore, I was orchestrating a revelation that would ensure maximum impact and accountability for everyone involved, while guaranteeing that the consequences would extend far beyond personal embarrassment into permanent professional and social destruction. The dinner party concept emerged from a conversation I overheard Trevor having with his business partner Marcus Beaumont about their upcoming regional development conference in Crescent City. Marcus mentioned that the conference would conclude with an exclusive networking dinner for the region's most prominent real estate professionals, where major investors and development firms would announce their upcoming projects and strategic partnerships. The casual way he discussed combining business presentations with social networking sparked an idea that would become the foundation for my entire strategy. I began researching Nathan Hartwell's personal life with the same systematic thoroughness I brought to analyzing corporate executive backgrounds. Through carefully crafted social media investigation and professional networking searches, I discovered that Nathan was not only a respected cardiologist but also someone who took immense pride in his marriage to Delilah. His social media presence was filled with admiring photos of his wife at various medical conferences and charity events, always with captions that emphasized how fortunate he felt to be married to such an accomplished and beautiful woman. More importantly, I learned that Nathan and Delilah's wedding anniversary was approaching in early December, and Nathan had been posting increasingly elaborate hints about planning something special to commemorate their milestone. His LinkedIn updates mentioned taking time off from his demanding surgical schedule to focus on personal priorities, while his Facebook posts showed him researching romantic restaurants and anniversary gift ideas with the enthusiasm of someone planning a major surprise. The irony was perfect and devastating. While Delilah was having an affair with my husband and planning to abandon her marriage for a completely different life, Nathan was investing significant time and emotional energy in celebrating what he believed was their strong and enduring partnership. The man who was about to be publicly humiliated was simultaneously preparing to honor a marriage that his wife had already decided to destroy. The foundation of my plan required bringing both betrayed spouses together in a setting where the truth could emerge naturally, with sufficient witnesses to prevent any attempt at denial or damage control. But simply arranging for Nathan and me to meet wouldn't create the dramatic impact I was seeking. I needed a scenario where Trevor and Delilah would be forced to maintain their deception while simultaneously being exposed to the very people they'd been betraying. The solution came through my professional network at Pinnacle Creative Solutions. My colleague Rebecca Martinez mentioned that her husband David was organizing a luxury marketing symposium that would bring together professionals from various industries to discuss innovative approaches to high-end consumer engagement. The symposium was scheduled for the first weekend in December and was actively recruiting prominent business leaders to participate in panel discussions and networking events. I volunteered to help with event coordination, offering my organizational skills and extensive professional connections to ensure the symposium attracted influential attendees from throughout the region. More importantly, I used my position to influence the guest list and seating arrangements for the formal dinner that would conclude the symposium weekend, ensuring that all the key players in my drama would be present and positioned exactly where I needed them. Through careful manipulation of the invitation process, I ensured that Trevor received a personal invitation to participate in a panel discussion about sustainable development practices in luxury residential markets. His expertise in high-end commercial development and his growing regional reputation made him a logical choice for the symposium, while the networking opportunities would appeal to his professional ambitions and his desire to expand his business relationships. The symposium dinner would be held at the grand ballroom of the historic Willowbrook Manor, the same elegant venue where Trevor and I had celebrated our wedding 9 years earlier. The symbolism wasn't accidental. I wanted our marriage to be destroyed in the same location where we'd promised to honor and cherish each other for the rest of our lives. The venue's formal atmosphere and prestigious reputation would ensure that the evening's events would be witnessed by exactly the kind of influential professionals whose opinions could make or break careers in our community. But getting Trevor to the symposium dinner was only the first component of my strategy. I needed Delilah present as well, and I needed her to be completely unaware of the trap she was walking into. This required a separate but coordinated approach that took advantage of her professional vanity and her desire for social advancement within Willowbrook County's business community, using techniques I'd learned during asset recovery investigations. I created a fictional consulting opportunity through a shell company I established with the help of my corporate law contacts. Posing as a representative of Meridian Luxury Developments, an exclusive resort planning company allegedly expanding into the Northeast market, I approached Delilah about providing expert consultation services for their new facility design and marketing strategy. The consultation meeting was scheduled for the same weekend as the marketing symposium, with a dinner presentation that would allow Delilah to network with potential investors and luxury development professionals who might refer high-value clients to her marketing firm. I presented the opportunity as a chance to establish herself as the premier luxury marketing consultant in the region, with the potential for a long-term retainer relationship that could significantly expand her business. Delilah's response exceeded my most optimistic expectations. She was not only enthusiastic about the consulting opportunity but also eager to use the dinner as a platform to showcase her expertise and expand her professional network. She even asked if she could suggest additional attendees who might be interested in the luxury development concept, giving me the perfect opening to mention that Trevor Cross would be present as a potential investor and development partner. The pieces were falling into place with satisfying precision. Trevor would attend the symposium dinner believing it was a routine professional obligation that could advance his business interests. Delilah would arrive confident that she was participating in a lucrative consulting opportunity that would establish her as a major player in luxury marketing. Neither of them would realize that they were walking into the most carefully orchestrated exposure of adultery in Willowbrook County history, but arranging the guest list was only the beginning of my preparation. I needed to ensure that Nathan would be present to witness his wife's betrayal, and I needed him positioned where his reaction would be visible to the maximum number of influential witnesses. This required an additional layer of deception that would bring Nathan to the venue without raising Delilah's suspicions about his unexpected presence. The solution came through Nathan's own anniversary planning efforts. Through carefully placed social media interactions and mutual acquaintances, I learned that Nathan had been researching surprise party venues and anniversary celebration ideas. I used an intermediary to suggest that the grand ballroom at Willowbrook Manor would be perfect for an intimate anniversary dinner, and that the marketing symposium weekend would provide excellent cover for organizing a surprise celebration without Delilah becoming suspicious. I even offered to help coordinate the surprise, suggesting that Nathan could arrive during the networking cocktail hour with flowers and champagne, creating a romantic moment that would transition seamlessly into their private anniversary dinner. Nathan was thrilled with the idea, particularly the opportunity to surprise Delilah in such an elegant setting while she was focused on her professional networking activities. The final element of my plan involved carefully choreographing the evening's events to ensure maximum dramatic impact. I would need to present my evidence at precisely the right moment, with all parties present and no opportunity for escape or deflection. The timing would be crucial. Too early and Trevor or Delilah might find ways to minimize the damage. Too late and some guests might leave before witnessing the complete revelation. As the symposium weekend approached, I felt the same combination of nervous energy and analytical focus that preceded my most important professional presentations. Every detail had been planned and verified, every contingency anticipated and prepared for. The evidence was overwhelming, the witnesses were positioned perfectly, and the setting would ensure that the consequences extended far beyond immediate emotional devastation. Trevor and Delilah had constructed their relationship with careful attention to secrecy and security, but they'd underestimated the investigative capabilities of someone who specialized in exposing sophisticated deceptions. Their elaborate affair was about to be dissected with surgical precision in front of an audience that would ensure their betrayal became a permanent part of their professional and social legacy. The evening of the marketing symposium dinner arrived. With the crystalline clarity of early December in Connecticut, the kind of night where every detail seemed sharp and defined against the backdrop of winter. I stood in my walk-in closet, adjusting the emerald green silk dress I'd chosen specifically for this occasion, elegant enough for the formal symposium dinner but with clean lines that suggested control and precision rather than vulnerability. My reflection showed a woman who looked composed and professional, betraying nothing of the calculated justice that had been building for months. Trevor had left the house 3 hours earlier, claiming he needed to review his panel presentation materials before the symposium dinner. In reality, I knew from Cassandra's final surveillance report that he was meeting Delilah at the Riverside Hotel for what they believed would be their last secret rendezvous before transitioning to a more open relationship after the holidays. They had no idea that their romantic afternoon was being documented by professional-grade surveillance equipment that would provide the final pieces of evidence for tonight's revelation. The grand ballroom at Willowbrook Manor buzzed with the sophisticated energy of Connecticut's business elite gathering for what they expected to be a routine professional networking dinner. Distinguished executives and their spouses filled the elegant space, creating the perfect backdrop for the social catastrophe I was about to orchestrate. The irony of destroying my marriage in the same room where I'd celebrated it 9 years earlier wasn't lost on me. It felt like completing a circle that had been broken by deception and would now be closed by truth. That I arrived precisely 30 minutes before the cocktail hour's scheduled conclusion, positioning myself near the registration desk where I could observe the other key players as they made their entrances. The seating chart I'd carefully arranged through my volunteer coordination role would ensure that all the principal characters in tonight's drama would be positioned for maximum impact when the truth emerged. Trevor arrived first, looking distinguished. In his navy blue suit, his silver cufflinks catching the ballroom's chandelier light. He moved through the crowd with practiced confidence, stopping to chat with potential business partners and introducing himself to marketing executives he hadn't met previously. His obvious comfort in these social settings was part of what had made him so successful in real estate development, but tonight it would work against him when his carefully maintained professional facade crumbled in front of everyone who mattered. In his career, when I approached to greet him as the event coordinator, Trevor's enthusiasm seemed genuine rather than forced. He thanked me for helping organize such an impressive gathering, mentioning how valuable the networking opportunities would be for expanding his business relationships. The man had no idea that his beloved wife had spent months orchestrating his professional and personal destruction. Delilah made her entrance 25 minutes later, and I felt a cold satisfaction watching her scan the room with barely concealed anticipation. She looked absolutely stunning in a midnight blue cocktail dress that emphasized her auburn hair and confident bearing, every inch the successful marketing consultant who belonged in these exclusive professional circles. But her composure cracked slightly when she spotted Trevor across the room, clearly not expecting to encounter him at what she believed was her private consulting opportunity. I watched with professional appreciation as Delilah attempted to manage the complex dynamics of greeting colleagues and potential clients while avoiding any interaction with Trevor that might suggest inappropriate familiarity. Her solution was to position herself strategically near the bar where she could monitor his movements while maintaining the appearance of casual professional circulation. The dinner seating arrangement at orchestrated placed Trevor and Delilah at adjacent tables, close enough that their body language would be obvious to observant guests but not so close as to suggest deliberate coordination. As the cocktail hour concluded and guests began moving toward their assigned seats, I could see both of them calculating the risks of their proximity and trying to determine how to navigate the evening without raising suspicions. The first course was served, a delicate butternut squash bisque that seemed absurdly civilized given what was about to unfold, when Nathan Hartwell made his entrance carrying a bouquet of white orchids and a bottle of Dom Perignon champagne. He looked distinguished and genuinely happy, clearly believing he was about to surprise his beloved wife with a romantic anniversary gesture that would create a perfect memory. The moment Nathan stepped into the ballroom, Delilah's face underwent a transformation that was visible even from across the room. The confident, predatory smile that had defined her expression all evening crumbled into something approaching pure terror. She went completely pale, her wine glass trembling in her hand as she realized that her carefully compartmentalized worlds were about to collide in the most public way possible. Trevor noticed Nathan's entrance and immediately understood the implications. His face went rigid with panic as he calculated the impossible mathematics of explaining why his supposed business associate's husband was surprising his wife at a professional dinner where Trevor was also present. The man who'd spent months constructing elaborate lies suddenly found himself in a situation where no amount of deception could explain away the obvious connections. I stood from my seat and approached the microphone that had been set up for evening announcements, my voice carrying the same authority I'd used during federal court testimony. Ladies and gentlemen, before we continue with our symposium dinner, I believe there's something important that everyone in this room needs to understand about professional ethics and personal integrity. The conversation gradually quieted as guests sensed the shift in tone. Nathan looked curious but unconcerned, still believing he was simply arriving early for a surprise anniversary celebration. Trevor had gone completely still, finally understanding that his carefully controlled evening was about to become his worst nightmare. Delilah's hands were visibly shaking as she reached for her napkin, her composed facade cracking under the pressure of impending exposure. This evening's discussion about marketing ethics and professional boundaries seems particularly relevant, I continued, opening the manila envelope that contained months of investigative work, given that we have an excellent case study sitting right here in our ballroom. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the soft sounds of servers discreetly moving around the perimeter of the room. Every guest was now focused entirely on my words, sensing that they were about to witness something extraordinary. That would be discussed in professional circles for years to come. The first photograph I placed on the presentation screen showed Trevor and Delilah entering the Riverside Hotel together earlier that afternoon, their body language unmistakably intimate as Trevor's hand rested possessively on Delilah's lower back. The image was crystal clear, taken with professional surveillance equipment that captured every detail of their comfortable familiarity, the way Delilah leaned into his touch, the satisfied smile on Trevor's face, the obvious ease of two people who'd done this many times before. Nathan's champagne bottle slipped from his hands and shattered against the marble floor, the sound echoing through the stunned silence like a gunshot. He stared at the screen in complete disbelief, his face cycling through confusion, recognition, and dawning horror in the span of seconds. "I don't understand," he said quietly, his voice barely audible above the shocked murmurs beginning to ripple through the ballroom. "Delilah told me she was attending a marketing consultation tonight. She said she was meeting with potential investors." "She was meeting with someone," I replied, my voice steady and clinical as I advanced to the next image. "But not investors." The second photograph showed Trevor and Delilah in an intimate embrace on a private resort balcony, their faces turned toward each other with the kind of tender attention that spoke of deep emotional connection rather than casual physical attraction. The timestamp indicated it had been taken during Trevor's supposed business conference in Hartford 3 weeks earlier. Delilah finally found her voice, though it came out strained and desperate. "Evangeline, please," she whispered, her professional composure completely shattered. "You don't understand the situation. This isn't what it looks like." "Actually, I understand the situation perfectly," I said, continuing to present evidence with the methodical precision I'd perfected during hostile business negotiations. "I've spent 4 months investigating every detail of your relationship with my husband. Would you like me to explain exactly what I've discovered?" The ballroom had fallen into complete silence, distinguished professionals and their spouses leaning forward in their chairs, drawn into the unfolding drama despite their discomfort with the public nature of the revelation. Cell phones were discreetly appearing as people began documenting what would undoubtedly become the most talked about professional event in regional business history. For months, I repeated, ensuring that everyone understood the scope of the deception. Not a momentary lapse in judgment or a brief affair that got out of hand. A systematically planned relationship that involved elaborate lies, financial deception, and the complete betrayal of 2 marriages. I continued placing evidence on the presentation screen: hotel receipts from romantic weekend getaways, restaurant bills from intimate dinners, jewelry store receipts for expensive items that had appeared in Delilah's social media posts but never in our home. Text message screenshots that revealed the emotional depth of their relationship and their plans for a shared future. 8 months have passed since that devastating December evening at Willowbrook Manor, and I'm sitting in my new corner office on the 42nd floor of the Crescent City Financial Tower, watching the sunset paint the Connecticut River Valley in shades of gold and crimson. The view from here is breathtaking, a panoramic vista that stretches across 4 counties and reminds me daily that my life has expanded in ways I never could have imagined when I was trapped in the suffocating web of Trevor's deception. This office represents everything my marriage to Trevor wasn't: honest, transparent, and entirely under my control. Every decision about the space, from the minimalist furniture to the carefully curated art collection, has been made by me for me, without having to consider anyone else's hidden agendas or secret preferences. The freedom of that authenticity is still intoxicating after 9 years of unknowingly living a lie constructed by someone I trusted completely. The aftermath of that symposium dinner was swift and brutal, like watching a controlled demolition that destroyed multiple structures simultaneously. Within hours of the revelation, videos and photos of the spectacular exposure had spread throughout Connecticut's business community via social media and professional networks. The distinguished executives who'd witnessed Trevor and Delilah's public humiliation became inadvertent broadcasters of their professional destruction, sharing details of the evening's events that ensured the consequences would extend far beyond personal embarrassment. Trevor's career imploded with devastating speed that surprised even me, despite my careful planning. The Regional Development Consortium he'd been courting for his largest project withdrew their investment offer within 48 hours, citing concerns about his professional judgment and ethical standards. His business partner Marcus Beaumont dissolved their partnership immediately, publicly stating that the firm couldn't maintain its reputation while associated with someone who demonstrated such fundamental character flaws. The Connecticut Real Estate Development Board launched an investigation into Trevor's business practices, focusing particularly on the inflated consulting fees he'd been paying to Delilah's marketing firm. While they found no evidence of direct fraud in his client relationships, the investigation revealed that Trevor had been misrepresenting project costs and timeline estimates to create opportunities for extended collaboration with Prestige Brand Management. His professional license was suspended pending further review, effectively ending his ability to practice commercial development in the state. Delilah's professional destruction was even more complete and personally satisfying to witness. Nathan, demonstrating the kind of principled strength that made me understand why she'd been so foolish to risk losing him, filed formal complaints with every professional organization that governed marketing practices in Connecticut. His connections in the medical community meant these complaints were taken seriously and investigated thoroughly, revealing financial irregularities that extended far beyond her personal deceptions. The investigation uncovered that Delilah had been systematically overbilling clients for marketing services that were never provided, using the extra income to fund her lifestyle and her relationship with Trevor. She'd also been manipulating project timelines and budget estimates to create artificial demand for extended consulting contracts, particularly with clients that Trevor had directed to her firm. The combination of professional misconduct and fraudulent billing practices resulted in criminal charges that sent her to federal prison for 14 months. Nathan's response to his wife's betrayal demonstrated exactly the kind of dignified integrity that made him deserve so much better than what he'd been given. He filed for divorce immediately, but he also did something that surprised and moved me deeply. He reached out to me directly, not seeking shared misery or emotional commiseration, but offering practical support for the legal and financial challenges I was facing as my own divorce proceedings began. Our friendship, which developed organically from our shared experience of public betrayal, became one of the most valuable and unexpected relationships in my transformed life. Nathan understood the unique psychological challenges of discovering that someone you trusted completely had been systematically deceiving you for months. He also brought a perspective on forgiveness and moving forward that helped me process my anger constructively rather than allowing it to consume my future possibilities. The divorce proceedings with Trevor were surprisingly straightforward, largely because his professional and financial destruction left him in no position to fight for anything substantial. Our assets were divided according to Connecticut's equitable distribution laws, but since Trevor's earning potential had been essentially eliminated and his business relationships were in ruins, I retained most of our shared wealth along with our investment portfolio. More importantly, I sold the house on Maple Ridge Drive immediately after the divorce was finalized. Living surrounded by memories of a marriage that had been partially fabricated from the beginning felt like existing in a museum of lies. Instead, I used the proceeds to establish the financial independence that ensures I'll never again be vulnerable to someone else's systematic deception. My career at Pinnacle Creative Solutions flourished in ways I hadn't anticipated. The notoriety From the symposium revelation, rather than damaging my professional reputation, actually enhanced it dramatically. Other women facing similar situations of sophisticated marital deception began seeking my services specifically, knowing that I understood both the technical aspects of investigative analysis and the emotional complexities of discovering that your closest relationships were built on elaborate lies. The firm created a new specialty division focused on personal fraud investigation and relationship verification, with me as the senior partner. We now handle cases involving hidden assets, secret relationships, and financial deception in high-net-worth situations throughout New England. My combination of technical expertise and personal experience with sophisticated deception made me uniquely qualified to help other people uncover truths they needed but were terrified to discover. The work is emotionally challenging but professionally rewarding in ways that my previous corporate consulting never achieved. There's something deeply satisfying about using the same analytical skills that initially blinded me to Trevor's deception to help other people escape similar situations before they waste years of their lives on relationships built on lies. More importantly, I've learned to apply those same investigative instincts to creating genuine connections rather than avoiding uncomfortable truths. I approach new friendships and potential romantic relationships with the same methodical attention to detail I bring to fraud investigations, but now I use those skills to verify authenticity rather than to rationalize away obvious red flags. The woman who walked into that ballroom 8 months ago, believing she could manipulate the narrative of her affair with my husband, had no idea she was confronting someone whose professional expertise involved destroying people who thought they were too clever to get caught. Delilah Hartwell learned in the most public way possible that some games are infinitely more dangerous than the players realize, especially when they underestimate their opponent's capabilities. Trevor discovered that the wife he'd taken for granted, the woman he'd assumed would never question his elaborate lies because she loved him too much to be suspicious, was actually someone who'd built her career on methodical investigation and had never lost a case in 15 years of professional fraud detection. His critical error was forgetting that his partner specialized in ensuring that people who believed their deceptions were too sophisticated to unravel learned exactly how wrong they were. Tonight, as I prepare dinner in my beautiful new apartment, I'm expecting Nathan to arrive for our weekly Tuesday evening tradition. We cook together, discuss our respective work challenges, and share the kind of honest conversation that neither of us had experienced in our previous marriages. It's not romantic, we're both too recently wounded and too focused on rebuilding our individual lives for that kind of vulnerability, but it's genuine in ways that feel revolutionary after years of unknowingly participating in someone else's performance. The view from this office reminds me daily that perspective changes everything. From down in the valley of my marriage to Trevor, I couldn't see the scope of the deception surrounding me, couldn't recognize that my entire life had been constructed around someone else's lies. But from up here, with clarity and distance and hard-earned wisdom, I can see for miles in every direction. And I never intend to be trapped in someone else's elaborate fiction again. Tomorrow I'm starting work on a new case involving a prominent Hartford executive whose wife suspects he's been hiding assets offshore while planning to abandon their family for a younger colleague he met through his consulting firm. It's exactly the kind of sophisticated financial and emotional deception that makes my analytical mind sharpen with professional excitement, and I intend to unravel it with the same methodical thoroughness that exposed Trevor and Delilah's affair. The woman who specialized in following money trails through corporate mazes has learned to follow emotional trails with equal precision, and the results are devastatingly effective for anyone foolish enough to underestimate her capabilities. Justice, I've discovered, tastes even better when it's served with perfect timing, overwhelming evidence, and exactly the right witnesses to ensure that the consequences extend far beyond personal embarrassment into permanent accountability. And If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt like someone was playing dangerous games with your life or your trust, make sure you subscribe because tomorrow's story about a business partner who thought she could steal both my clients and my fiancé is going to leave you absolutely speechless. Trust me, you won't want to miss how that one ends. Coming up next, you'll see 2 more stories we handpicked just for you. If this one struck a chord, you're going to love what's next. Tap to keep the journey going.